Hey everyone, it's Carissa at Sprinkled with Glitter. Thanks for joining me today. Today I am creating a card featuring coloring with ink blending brushes. Now, ink blending brushes are wonderful for creating soft blended backgrounds, but it's also great. These smaller sizes are perfect for blending onto stamped images and coloring your stamped images that way. So I am starting out with this stamp. This is from Neat and Tangled's August release. It's the Grateful Heart stamp set. It's got this beautiful floral cluster. And I am using some Tim Holtz watercolor cardstock. I am going to do some heat embossing on this. So I'm inking up with some Versamark ink, and I'm going to stamp it right onto my cardstock. And it is hanging off a little bit because I thought I was going to make this more single layer than I did, but you'll see where I went wrong in just a bit. So I'm going to stamp it a couple of times using my Mini Misty. I'm stamping it in the exact same spot so that I make sure that I get good coverage on this less smooth cardstock. Since watercolor cardstock has a little more texture, I want to make sure that I get everything inked and stamped on there properly. Then I'm going to cover it with some white embossing powder, and I'm going to heat set that. So I'm left with a shiny, smooth, white raised image. So it's kind of hard to see because it's white on white. But then I can get into my coloring. And I'm using some Distress Oxide colors here. I'm using Abandoned Coral, Spice Marmalade, and Crushed Olives. And I'm using these tiny brushes from the Picket Studios life-changing blending brushes to add a little bit of color to these flowers. And you're going to see them come to life. Now, blending brushes tend to give you a really soft blend. And they just function a little bit differently than like a foam blending tool. They tend to put down a little less intensity of ink, and you can get these really nice soft blends with them. If you keep working with them, you can build up the color to more intense, but I just kind of wanted to show you this beautiful soft coloring that you could get. Now, as I dip these into the ink, you can see I'm kind of tapping them off onto some scratch paper. You can get blobs with these. You don't tend to get it as much, but I do like to kind of just tap it off before I take it to my cardstock. And once I'm done blending all those colors on, I am going to just rub over the top of the embossing powder to remove any extra ink that's sitting on top of my embossing. Now, I decided to add a kind of background, and so I'm using the Broken China here and a little bit larger blending brush here. And then I wanted to add a little bit of shadow, so I'm just taking the T1 Copic marker and tracing around my emboss line. Now, you want to make sure that you're not touching the tip of the marker to the embossing because it will eat away at the embossing powder, and it can transfer that embossing powder to your Copic marker tip. But if you're really careful, you can add this little bit of shading, and you can see how that really makes that image pop. Now, this is beautiful, I will say. It's so beautiful as it is. And I decided I wanted to try to add a little bit more, and this is where I went wrong. So I die cut this floral cluster from just some regular computer paper or lightweight typing paper. It's probably like an old nursing school care plan. And I'm going to put it over the top of my flower cluster using some repositionable adhesive. So I'm just putting this over the top to protect that flower cluster because I've colored it. It's beautiful. It's exactly the way I want it. And once I have that protected, I'm going to take this background stamp from Neat and Tangled. It's also from the August release. I'm going to ink it up with some Twilight ink from Catherine Pooler. And I did stamp it off just one time. And then I'm going to take this card front and lay it onto my background stamp here and just press all over it to transfer that pattern onto my card front here. Now, I decided I didn't like those polka dots. I felt like I had ruined my card, but I'm going to keep working and I'm going to make this work. So I'm just going to take the coordinating die and I'm going to die cut this out. And I'm using the Thermoweb purple tape to just hold it in place, hold the die in place as I run this through my die cut machine. And now I have my beautiful floral cluster that's still intact. I can just do something else with it. And that's what we're going to do. So I decided to just take this and mount it onto some navy cardstock. So this navy cardstock is from Hero Arts, and I'm just eyeballing the size that I need here. I'm going to use that straight edge to my advantage because I did have the floral cluster kind of hanging off the edge of the cardstock. It does have one very straight edge. And so I'm just going to butt that up against the straight edge of this navy cardstock that I've cut down. And I'm going to use some foam adhesive to add my floral cluster onto this navy backdrop that I've created. And in order to make sure that those edges line up, I'm just going to use the work surface to just make sure that those two edges are kind of even with each other, and then I can press that down. And that makes for a really beautiful contrasting backdrop for this little floral cluster here. Now from that same stamp set, that Grateful Heart stamp set from Neat and Tangled, I have this sentiment here, and I decided just to kind of keep this very simple and stamp this alongside of where I'm going to place this onto my card base. So this is a top folding A2 size card base. It's cut to 4 1/4 by 11 and scored at 5 1/2 inches to create my card base. And I have my sentiment here in my Mini Misty, and I'm just stamping it with a little bit of Versamark ink. I did prep the surface with my powder tool prior to stamping on this so that I could make sure I got a nice clean embossed image. And then I'm adding some gold embossing powder over the top and just heat setting that. And it says with a grateful heart. Now before I add this little navy and floral grouping here, I'm going to add just a little bit of natural twine to it, tie it in a bow. This is, I believe, twine from Lawn Fawn. I'll be sure to link it in the description below. It's just to add a little something extra onto this card because it is a very simple card. And I am going to adhere this entire thing onto my card base using some foam adhesive. And to make sure I have it all lined up straight, I'm going to use my T-square ruler to make sure those edges are where they need to be. And that pretty much finishes off my card for today. It's very simple, but I wanted to show you that you can absolutely use these blending brushes for more than just creating backgrounds. And those smaller sizes come in really handy for things like stamped images and those little tiny leaves. And I think it's a really beautiful and soft effect. As always, you can find links to the featured products used in this project in the description at YouTube, but head on over to my blog at sprinkledwithglitter.com. Over there, you'll find more still shots, more information, and a complete list of supplies. Thanks for stopping by today and watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications for my channel so you won't miss any of my paper crafting and card making video tutorials here. I really appreciate you hanging out with me today. Once again, thanks for watching, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the very end. You know, if you've made it this far, you are one of my favorites. To subscribe to my channel, click the button on the left side of the screen, and here's a couple more video tutorials I thought you might enjoy.